All right, looks like we're going.
Uh, are we?
Yep.
Okay. Um,
So let's
yeah,
get
we're having,
introductions out of the way.
yeah, we seem to be having some issue with our Facebook stream. We'll have to deal with that later, I guess.
Okay. We'll give this a try and get what we get. Okay, everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us on this
Yeah.
live stream. Or if you're watching it after we post it, after it's been recorded, we're glad you're here and checking us out. My name's Seth. With us is Travis.
Hey,
We're
hey.
in games, and we just want to give an update on where we are in editing the manual and talk a little bit about something we can call GM concepts today. We'll talk
Yeah.
about genre and mode. So, Travis, you wanna hit up the editing update right now?
Yeah. So the biggest editing thing is that we're about 99% complete with the talents chapter. I think there's one thing that's still floating out there before we call it completely good. And we're about 75% of the way through traits, which is advantages and drawbacks. And then we'll move into powers. And powers is where we're going to have a couple knockdown, drag out fights, I think, about how things are going to work. Not really, but it's still it's got a lot in it. And then after that, we'll have 2 more chapters to edit before we'll be ready to put stuff together for our first product release, which will be what we call the beer and pretzels kit, or soda and potato chips, whatever you want, which will be a free release, and it'll be just kind of a quick play, some pre-generated characters, a simple adventure you can run through, something you can download it, print it out, and hopefully be able to be playing within an hour or so and have a good time.
Yeah, we're really excited to get this into people's hands, and we want to make this part free to get people excited about what we're doing. It is a really scaled back version of the full game, but it should give people the idea of what they can do and how it might be different from other systems. So we hope it'll get people's interest, and we're looking forward to it. I think we're trying to get this out the door by Halloween.
We'd like to. We've got some stuff that we're trying to work in the background that would fit really well with a Halloween release, but well, fingers crossed. We'll see what we'll be able to do. We're already pushing our production schedule, so we'll just see where we can get with it.
Yeah. So let's talk about genre and mode, shall we? Can we start off by let's talk about genre first, and as simply as possible, how do you kind of frame what genre is for somebody who might not immediately understand that?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a half step back and just kind of explain what we use genre and mode for.
Cool.
Yeah. So for us, we think it's useful to have a framework to think about how to tell stories within the concept of a tabletop role-playing game. And so the model that we have, all models are wrong. Some of them are useful. Our model is, we call it genre and mode. And genre is really kind of boils down to what is the predominant power within the game world. Is it magic or is it technology? And we really kind of split that out in 3 ways. We'll come back to that in a second. So that's what genre is. And then mode really is it's like the lens through which you focus the genre to tell a specific type of story within your overarching game world.
Yeah.
And what we found is that this model allows us to use one set of rules, and one cohesive like narrative setting, one game world to tell virtually any kind of story that you want to tell. And so you can work through this. And so we break it out into, there's 3 genres, and I think we have ended up with 6 modes that you can then combine together. And mode, I will admit, mode is genre, and genre is much more kind of digital, right? It's 1 or it's 2 or it's 3, right? There's not a lot of, it doesn't really function like a continuum. Mode, on the other hand, is very much a continuum. And so you can kind of, it's very easy to blur the lines between one mode or another.
And so within one campaign that all took place in a certain genre, you could experience different modes.
Yeah. Or you could say, hey, we want a little bit of this mode and a little bit of this mode, and smash them together in a mode sandwich, and you can kind of get what you want. And within the context of our game system, where we talk about this in the book, it actually gives mechanical tools of how to alter some of the base rules so that the mechanics of the game and the dice rolling and all that stuff and the way that works enhances the kind of emotional tone of the gameplay and the storytelling they're trying to achieve. And so it can be really, really useful to give players exactly the play experience that they want.
So let's start off with genre then, and there are 3 genres that we outline in the book. The first one is fantasy.
Yeah, fantasy. And let's see, if I go a little cross-eyed, it's because I'm looking at a separate document, not the camera. So just let me know. So we have fantasy, and you can kind of break that down into high fantasy versus low fantasy. The biggest thing is that magic exists, and magic is more powerful than technology. And then high and low fantasy really is differentiating how prevalent magic is, if that makes sense.
Okay. And so if you're not playing fantasy, maybe you would play in a more technological genre.
Right. Yeah, we term that science fiction. We kind of think of this again as you have a 2-prong. You can call it soft sci-fi versus hard sci-fi, and it really is how grounded in actual science and technology your game world is. And here's a hot take: settings set in the real world, we consider these to be sci-fi because it's fiction based on science. That science is your predominant power within the game world. It's just we call it a non-speculative level of technology. It's just where we happen to be today, or in whatever historical setting you're doing.
Right. So then the third genre is altered world, as we call it, right?
We call it altered world. I think we kind of if you wanted to call it something a little more generic, you could call it blended, but it's basically the idea that science and fantasy exist closer to a balance. In the fiction world, I think the thing that draws closest to this would be there's a series of books by an author named Piers Anthony called Incarnations of Immortality. Within that narrative setting, science and magic are in balance within the world, and neither is more powerful than the other. They just coexist. And so with this one, you get a little more differentiation. You can have, because you've got these 4 combinations, you can have high fantasy and soft science, or high fantasy and hard science. So lots of magic, and then depend on how rigorous you want to be with your scientific accuracy. And then you can have low fantasy, soft or hard science. And so that then gives you magic is less, perhaps more powerful, but less common. And then again, what level of technological accuracy do you want to have within your setting? Our pre-written narrative setting falls into that blended genre, and it is called altered world.
Right. Yeah. So anytime you've got your nose in the manual and you're looking at the milieu that exists there, it's kind of cyberpunky. You have this mix of science and technology, and both are very effective. And
Right.
that's where we tend to create from. And then the other genres are available for anybody who wants to use the same rule set and use it effectively without having to do a lot of editing on the fly, or spend a lot of work on that. The rules are designed to be effective in any of those three genres. So
Well,
if,
and
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. Well, so what I would say is that even the interesting thing is that you can play any of these three genres within the existing narrative world, um, just by saying we're going to focus. You could within our narrative setting, about 95% of the global surface is pristine wilderness, and you have these ultra high density urban centers, and that urban or that wilderness is also like populated by fantastical alien and magical creatures. And so, if you wanted to play a traditional kind of sword and sorcery, frankly, like Dungeons and Dragons type experience, you could quite easily set your game within what's called the wild side and never venture into any of the urban areas. And it would feel very much like a traditional sword and sorcery type game, but it's all within that narrative setting. And then you could also, likewise, if you wanted to play something that was very much akin to like a playing in the world of William Gibson's books, you could quite easily just set within one level or one small geographic region of one of the polises and make a rule that, just choose not to use any powered individuals within the world, because strictly speaking, population wise, most people on the planet, 90 to 95%, don't have supernatural powers. And so it's quite easy to play a pure science fiction game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all still within the same narrative setting. So you don't even have to homebrew a game world. You just choose to focus on one element or another and play whatever you want.
Yeah. For me, I like that blended aspect a lot.
Oh, for sure. I love it.
In the games that I like to play, science and magic kind of operate hand in hand. You've got both of those flavors available to you. And that gives players a lot of freedom to play the character they want. And as a game master, you have a lot of freedom to tell some pretty interesting stories. I'm a big fan of like that stuff all gets worked out in a session zero kind of place where everybody
100%.
talks about what they want. But, the possibilities are there. And if everybody agrees that they want to start in a blended setting and just lean hard in one direction or the other, but leave the possibility open, I like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's, and some of that is also attributable to like what mode you choose to play through, right? That's another thing that really.
So that's a good segue. Let's introduce the idea of mode a little bit, and then once we do that, in the interest of time, I think maybe we could just compare and contrast two of them, like horror and heroic or something like that.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. So just quickly, the modes that we've identified, right? We have heroic, action adventure, which is kind of like a step up from heroic. You have mystery, dystopian, horror, and then we added in, this is something that we're bringing into the game. It was not part of the original version that we're working from, was comedy, because we felt like it's a play style that can be done and is enjoyable.
Right.
And so within the mode construct, right, there's really 4 questions that you're asking to determine that help determine how the story is going to go, right? Is 1, how do the players relate to the rest of the world in terms of how powerful they are? Are they more or less powerful than the average person? And that power level can also be broken down in terms of their offensive power and then their survivability. So then the next one is, what kind of narrative structure are you going to use? Is it going to be episodic? Is it going to be kind of an epic saga? Those kinds of things. the scope of the story that you're going to tell? Is it going to be very small? Like, to use a reference to the Marvel comics or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the idea that you have the street level adventurers or street level heroes like Daredevil and Spider-Man that are dealing with petty criminals most of the time, and then you've got the ascendant level heroes like Thor and Captain Marvel that are saving the universe, and so that element of story scope really plays a factor in. And then the fourth thing is, what is the role of humor within the story that you're trying to tell? And so that's how you differentiate between the different modes. And so maybe a good one to compare and contrast would be things like heroic versus action adventure, because they're very similar in a lot of ways, but there are some subtle but important differences, I think.
Sure. For me, when I think about the heroic bit, you really are digging deep into aspects of the character that might tend to get glossed over in the action adventure bit, right? Like it might be a little lighter on the role playing side on action adventure, and you keep the story rolling. The heroic. I like to have characters with sort of this very Greek gravitas, like heroic flaw. They've got the seeds of their own undoing is baked into them somehow. Whereas in the action adventure mode, you're just it's like a popcorn movie. You don't have to take it too seriously necessarily. And the name is in there, action, right? Like you just keep the action going.
I think the biggest difference to me between the mechanics of heroic mode versus action adventure really lies in this this first point, right? The power level. I think traditionally, and in my mind, a heroic mode is the player characters should always be more powerful than the average citizen, but they are slightly less powerful than the things that are arrayed against them. The idea being that they're always kind of having to struggle uphill and against these forces of evil that are going in the world. Whereas in an action adventure, you think of, I'm trying to think of, I think of this as like a John Woo movie, right? Like it's just the protagonist of the story is just blasting away, and the villains that you're facing are just completely underpowered. They're just getting mowed down by the protagonist. And then on top of that, you end up having this thing where the protagonist is able to just absorb an incredible amount of, punishment without really any chance that they're ever going to lose. Right. And that can be fun. And whereas heroic, right, I think with heroic, there's always got to be a real risk of the protagonist failing. Right.
And failure can look like any one of a number of different things, right? Like
right, for sure.
Death or something bad happening to a person you love, or you failed to save the city from the Kraken that was approaching, something like that. Those are kind of heroic elements. Whereas in the action adventure mode, you've got a lot of minions, and minions don't necessarily pose a lot of threat to you. So you can have fun mowing through crowds of minions. Right. It might be a little bit more combat heavy as well, right? Yeah,
for sure. Action adventure is almost always combat heavy, but you can still do there's you're probably never going to have a role play heavy action adventure, but you could definitely have exploration, right? Like I think the Indiana Jones films are probably a good example of an action adventure type story that doesn't have a whole lot of fighting, but that they kind of stick to those same kind of tropes, right? Like the minion comes out and starts swinging his sword all over the place, and and the protagonist just, pulls his gun and shoots him and walks away, right? And so and I think it also has to do with kind of the narrative structure, right? The narrative structure should be with heroic. It almost is like you have this kind of gradual progression of the hero becomes stronger and stronger, and the forces arrayed against them become stronger and stronger. But they're always still kind of slightly outmatched, and it's always an uphill battle. And then theoretically, they may even have like a dark moment where they're, kind of in the classic Jungian hero's journey, where they're, things start to feel like they're really in a bad spot, and then they hopefully emerge victorious. Action adventure is really, and you may have some of that hero's journey as well, but by and large, like the minions don't necessarily get any more powerful. They're always weaker than the character, than the protagonist, and really the protagonist doesn't really face a whole lot of challenge until they get to the very end of the story arc, right? And they face off on the BEG, as it were. I think heroic mode definitely lends itself to a kind of a grander scope. It doesn't always have to be, but they can tend that way, right? You think of any of the standard like sword and sorcery type adventures that are out there, where it's always some archlich is trying to end the world for some reason.
And in terms of scope, like your heroic campaign, if you're playing in the fantasy genre and the heroic mode, you expect that campaign to last a while, whereas the action adventure mode might be more episodic. People can drop in and out. You can pick it up and leave it at just about any point, right? Less compelling story in my book. And I'm sure people can play it differently, and you can have a bunch of fun stringing shorter adventures together with the same characters. But it lends itself to a more episodic kind of thing in my mind, where, in the heroic, I really like to explore what makes that hero tick, But I think bias.
Yeah, no, I think the heroic mode is very definitely more oriented towards RP and like backstory development. I think that's a good point, that action adventure is really more about just blasting baddies, right? And you don't necessarily have quite the same level of role play interaction with action adventure that you would expect with a heroic narrative story concept. And then I think the last of these points, right, is the role of humor. And this is actually where they often, between the two, there's not a lot of difference with the role of humor in action adventure versus heroic. I think that humor in particular is, in these story modes, is often used and best used to show the pluck of the protagonist, right? That they just simply are unfazed in the face of what appear to be overwhelming odds, right? And so you do that. That's conveyed through making jokes and one-liners and whatever. I think with action adventure, it kind of lends itself to a little more towards the cheesy end of things. Dylan, stick around, these really bad kind of 1980s action movie one-liners, because that's a real fun thing to do.
Right.
But like in heroic, right? It's the from the first, the very first Captain America film, right? Steve Rogers is in the alley getting in a fight, and he's just getting the tar kicked out of him. And he's like, I can do this all day. Right. And that's what humor is used for, is to really show that the hero and the protagonist has an indomitable spirit. Right.
Or it can come up in more role-playing moments, like what I think of is in the Lord of the Rings, where Frodo and Sam and Gollum, Smeagol at that point, are sitting around the campfire, and Sam is cooking and wishes he had some potatoes and
Yeah.
like, what's taters, precious?
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, it's lighthearted. It's not, hold your belly and laugh kind of thing, but it comes up in those role playing moments when there's not necessarily combat pressure or nobody's life is being threatened.
Right.
But for me, the role of humor is to relieve tension, right? Like as tension increases, humor is a real tempting safety valve for that. And to that end, like it's kind of antithetical to the horror mode, right? Like
Maybe.
well, if you're running a game in the horror mode, and when I've done it, I get buy-in from my players that, hey, we're going to play a horror game, and that means the one-liners and the zingers actually detract, right? Like they actively reduce the tension. That's what humor does, is reduce tension. So then when you're trying to, tell a scary story amongst friends, it's hard to do if somebody makes a joke here and there, because, well, now you've relieved the tension that amps up that feeling of being scared.
Yeah, I think that with that in particular, to me, the thing that you can do with the horror mode specifically with humor is that you can also use it to relieve tension intentionally as a tool to ramp up the horror factor, right? Like, so you do something, you sprinkle in something a little lighthearted, you release a little bit of the tension, and then you essentially create an opportunity to catch your players off guard. It's they're suspicious, something funny happens, their suspicion drops, and then you throw something horrible at them, and it has more impact because of the jarring shift of tone.
Yeah.
And that can be really good.
In my mind, running horror is a great challenge for a game master who's trying to expand their repertoire a little bit, because you do have to manage those sorts of things a little differently than in other modes. I like it. I find it a worthy challenge.
Yeah, for sure. But I will say, the problem with this topic is that we could talk about it for the whole day.
Sure.
We probably need to cut this here. We've been going about 27 minutes, 30 minutes, somewhere in there. So we'd like to thank everybody for stopping in and listening to us jabber on about the way we think about telling stories. And hopefully, you get something out of it. It resonates with you. Like I said, all models are wrong. Some of them are useful. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Give us, tell us where we're all totally off base. I think the one thing that seems to draw the most ire is the idea that real world type game worlds are science fiction. And that's primarily a semantic thing, but I'd love to hear thoughts on any of it. And so we thank you for sticking around. Seth, what are your parting shots?
Everything you just said. Yeah. Everybody, thanks. We really appreciate that this channel continues to grow. We hope to keep it growing. Tell your friends, if you like role-playing games, keep an eye on things. We'll try and keep you updated as to where we're at. We're really shooting for that Halloween release so we can put something in your hands and you can try this game we've been talking about for a few months now. And yeah, talk to us in the comments, ask us questions, tell us where we're getting it wrong, tell us what you want to see. For those of you who are interested, like if you want to tell us when a good time to go live is so that you can interact with us, please hit us up. Tell us if we can accommodate you, we will.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and we will talk to you later.
All right. Thanks.